So with that, it is my incredible honor and pleasure to introduce the first moderator and speaker for our panel. Dr. Laura Mosqueda is a professor of family medicine and geriatrics at the Keck School of Medicine at the University of Southern California, and the director of the National Center on Elder Abuse. She studies the causes, consequences, and prevention of elder abuse, particularly among those with dementia. Her work is done in a variety of places, from the lab to the classroom to the field. She serves as a consultant and expert witness for colleagues in law enforcement and as a standing member of the Los Angeles County Elder Abuse Forensics Center, a multidisciplinary team that directly serves older adults who may be victims of abuse or neglect. She is truly one of the nation's foremost experts on elder abuse. So we are extremely fortunate that she has taken the time out of her schedule to join us here today. So with that, I would invite Dr. Mosqueda and the first panel to join us up here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'll just say that, Andy Mao has done such a great job with the Elder Justice Initiative that when he invites me to something, I always say yes, because I think the work is so important and so good that he's leading here. And it's a real pleasure to be here and talking to all of you. I think I and my colleagues in the field of medicine are really grateful for all you do. And my work in elder abuse has really given me a glimpse into just the vast array of knowledge that you have to have in order to do your job. So hopefully what I'm going to present might make your life a little bit easier. I don't know. I'll just get the first thing out of the way, which is, yes, I do get called Dr. Mosquito a lot. And, I dry blood and stuff, so I guess it's not too far off. But my name is Laura Mosqueda, and I'll be here all day today. So if there's questions or things you want to chat about later in the day, find me, and I'm happy to talk to you. I did not put my email address in, I realized. So my email address is just my first name dot my last name at med.usc.edu, and you're welcome to contact me. All right, well, let's just talk about our game plan here. I'm going to be giving about 30 minutes of a medical overview into the wonderful world of geriatrics. Just out of curiosity, and you who are watching from home or from your office can also raise your hand. How many of you are aging? Okay, so I'll just note for our web-based audience, not everybody here raised their hand, which means you're dead. So hopefully everybody here is aging. And part of what we're going to be talking about is what happens with aging. What are some of the normal and usual things that happen with aging? And how does this then influence how we understand, detect, treat, prosecute when there's an elder abuse issue. So I'll be talking to you for about 30 minutes, and then my friend and colleague, Julie Shane, will be giving an overview of EAGLE, which you'll be hearing a lot about, the Elder Abuse Guide for Law Enforcement, something we really created for law enforcement. I've been talking to our team about creating something new called Beyond EAGLE, which would make it Beagle. But so far, nobody's really taken me up on that. And then what we're going to do is really spend about 45 minutes or so, we hope with audience participation, trying to utilize what Julie and I just spoke about, again, with my friend and colleague, Detective Cher Hill from the Anaheim Police Department, where she will be presenting some cases that she worked on as a detective, and she's still currently a detective working with Anaheim, California PD, so that we'll apply what we just talked about to actual cases. And really, it'll be more of us thinking out loud, having a conversation with you, and I hope very much that you'll be joined in on that conversation. We'll really be aware of that there are folks who are online, and so any questions or comments from the audience will be repeating into the mic so that everybody can hear that. So we're also very fortunate to have a special guest star, Paige Ulrey, who's going to be speaking to you later, but because she and I have worked together in the past, he said, hey, Paige, when Detective Hill and I are going over some of these cases, do you think we can drag you up here to help talk about some of these from a prosecutorial standpoint? And she was voluntold to do it. So we'll have Paige up here as well. So with all that said, let's just jump right in and start talking about aging. And I think, so I'm 63, so I certainly have noticed that as I'm aging, there are changes that occur that make us more susceptible to both physical and emotional sorts of injury. And um, it has to do with some of the cumulative things that occur as we age. We have chronic illnesses, and I apologize, I can't quite see the screen, so I'm going to muddle through just a little bit. We have chronic illnesses. People might have things like hypertension, high blood pressure, or diabetes, or heart failure, or all of the above. Then people are on medications. Well, they fell because they're on a medication, or they're bruising easily because they're on a medication. But as we age, we're more likely to be on multiple medications. Issues like depression can come up as well, which greatly influences issues related to figuring out if elder abuse is present and why it might be present. Dementia, we'll actually spend a few minutes specifically talking about dementia, using Alzheimer's as a kind of prototypical type, but there are other types of dementias that we'll mention. I think particularly Paige Ulrey will be talking about a case of somebody with a different type of dementia and why that's important. Not for you to know all the definitions of what dementia is and DSM diagnoses, but to get kind of a general overview of things is what we're trying to do. And then the quantity and quality of social support also changes as we age. Just because you have children doesn't mean you've got good relationships with them. Just because you have a spouse doesn't mean that they're going to be good or willing caregivers. So figuring all of those things out as we age becomes very important. And there are a couple of things that are sort of the usual and common changes of aging. And these are just a few examples. In our musculoskeletal system, our bone density goes down. So some of you have heard of osteopenia or osteoporosis. Our muscle mass tends to go down with aging. Our reaction time changes as we age. Or there may even be neurologic impairment. So some of you are familiar with Parkinson's disease. And I still vividly remember, and I'll just come out from behind the podium because I'm brave, and give you a demonstration of what it looks like, somebody with Parkinson's disease, depending on their level of treatment, and what their walking looks like. So they tend to have some shaking and a very shuffling gait. And I still vividly remember interviewing a person with Parkinson's disease whose son was coming at him with a knife, and he just simply couldn't get away. And so we ended up with very severe injuries. So these things can occur. Our reaction time goes down, can be harder to defend ourselves. The integument, or our skin, the outer layer of our skin, or the epidermis, becomes thinner. Our capillaries, which are those tiny little bridging vessels that connect our arterial and venous systems, get thinner. In our sensory system, we can end up with some decreased hearing called presbycusis. Changes in our vision, such as macular degeneration and cataracts. So these are all things that do occur with common sorts of issues that do occur with aging. And because these are common, it becomes really easy to attribute almost any injury we see to just, well, they're old. So what we tend to hear about, instead of worrying when somebody sees a bruise or a broken bone, that this might have been due to abuse, what we hear is, well, of course they have a fill in the blank, a pressure sore, a fracture, a bruise. They're old. And as you'll hear about in a few minutes, I got a little bit tired of that as a physician, going, I don't think that's just because they're old. And I'll show you some studies we did on bruising in order to understand this phenomenon a little bit more. But one thing I talk not only to you about, but to physicians about is, don't do that. Don't do that, because we can almost always find a reason other than abuse or neglect that an injury occurred. And so if we don't have it on our differential diagnosis, on our list of possibilities, we're always going to miss it. And I'll give you an example of this from the medical field. When somebody comes into my office with chest pain, I now have to think about, well, do they have a blood clot called a pulmonary embolus? Are they having a heart attack? Are they having costochondritis, a problem with their bone and cartilage connections in their rib? It could be a whole variety of things. That's my differential diagnosis. But if heart attack is not on my differential diagnosis, I'm going to miss it. And the same thing occurs with elder abuse. If it's not on your differential diagnosis as a possible problem, you're always going to miss it. So we can't go back to this. Of course, they have choose your injury. They're old. What I'm going to do in just a moment here is run a video to show you what happens with physical abuse. But one thing we often forget is where there's smoke, there's fire. So elder abuse can take a lot of different forms, and unfortunately occurs across all settings. This idea that, well, it just occurs in nursing homes is not true. Most of the abuse is occurring in private homes, and most of the abuse is occurring at the hands of spouses and adult children, far the majority compared to other people who might be abusing. So it occurs across all settings, and there's lots of different types of abuse. And unfortunately, polyvictimization, this idea that it's not just one type of abuse, but multiple types of abuse occurring to the same person at the same time, is a common phenomenon. So whenever I see physical abuse, we want to find out what the finances are, because you can almost always trace it back to a money issue, or at least frequently you can trace it back to a money issue. So whenever you see one type of abuse, look for other types of abuse as well. So before I launch into talking to you about physical abuse, I don't want this just to be about numbers. This is about people. These are about the people that we're serving. It's about protecting people and trying to minimize or prevent suffering. So I am going to show you a brief video. This is actually from our website about physical abuse. And then we'll talk more about it in just a moment. So if we could please run the video. Point out is, so this is a woman who was able to tell us what was going on. Imagine if she had Alzheimer's disease and she was telling us maybe even the same things and might not be believed, or unable to tell us what's going on. And we have a caregiver who said she fell. So we're going to talk more about how we're trying to distinguish forensic markers of abuse and neglect from something like she fell. The other thing to keep in mind is there are some people who don't want to tell you what happened. They might be embarrassed that this happened to them. They might not want any harm to come to their loved one, quote, loved one, who actually did this to them. And frankly, they might rather stay at home and be abused than go to a nursing home, which might be their only alternative. We don't know if this person is able to walk well, et cetera. She might require a lot of care at home from the very person who's abusing her. And that's why we're going to talk about how you set the stage to interview people in order to collect the kind of evidence you need to see if this is something that moves forward to prosecution, or to see what kind of help we might want to give this person and the family. So let's talk now about setting the stage for an interview. We can go to the next slide, please. The first thing is to establish rapport and privacy. You need to be in a private setting. I've had situations where I've been out with police or with adult protective services on a house call, and we know that the person we're worried about is just standing right there in an intimidating fashion. So we're really trying to get to know the person a little bit quickly, which can be a challenge, the victim, and establish some privacy. The environment has to be a safe one. And I normalize the questions. You know, I know this might be tough, but I ask everybody, is anybody hurting you? Are you afraid of anybody? Is anybody using your money without your permission? Those are sort of three questions that I ask very often. It's important to be empathetic and understand what's happening, and not to make assumptions. And I'll tell you, the reason I say don't assume is because I have been the worst person at this. And so I used to be, when I would hear that somebody's been married for 50 years, I would go, oh gosh, that's just amazing, you know? And they would often respond by saying that. But now that I've been more neutral and somebody says, yes, we've been married for 50 years, I'll say, how was it? And they go, 50 miserable years. Thank you for asking. And it wasn't until I started really being neutral and not making my assumptions, and importantly, becoming aware of my own biases about aging and about relationships, because I was fortunate to have wonderful grandparents. That's when I started hearing more from people, when I have this more neutral tone, not making assumptions, but really asking how things are going. And I think it's important to remember that we communicate with our whole body. And so I was, I'm acutely aware of this as a physician when patients have said, you know, sometimes I see a doctor and they're asking me if any had questions, but their hand is on the door, you know, they're ready to leave. So they might be asking me that question, but their whole body is telling me they got to get out of Dodge. So we have to be aware of that when we're interviewing older adults, establishing the rapport and not making assumptions. And we talk about interview tips. And all of this is actually on the Eagle website, but a calm and a quiet and a familiar environment whenever possible. Being aware of your body language. We just talked a little bit about that. The privacy, and to compensate for sensory deficits. So have any of you had the experience where you're talking to somebody and they're right by a window with a bright light and it's really hard to see their face? Have any of you had that experience? Are you awake? Okay, great. Okay, just checking, right? It's really hard. So if you're an older adult and you have a cataract, which causes even greater glare and halo effect, and you're an officer interviewing somebody and you're behind, you're right in front of their living room window, they might not, their hearing might be a little bit down, they can't read your lips. You have to be aware of all those things. If people have hearing aids, are they in? If they're in, are they on? If they're on, do the batteries work? All those sorts of things are really important, and they end up making your interview so much better if you pay attention to that. It also, I think, demonstrates empathy when you're saying, you know what, your glasses are really dirty. Let me wash them for you, and then we'll sit down and begin the interview. Little things like that really mean the world. I think one of the hardest things to do as a physician, and I think for detectives and people on patrol, et cetera, is when you have 1,000 million different things going on, when you're talking to that older adult who may be a victim, for them to feel like the only reason you exist at that moment is for them. And that's a real art. It's something I strive for, and I think something probably you strive for as well. But just taking that pause, calming down, and really being there for that person, it ends up not only being kind, but very efficient as well, because then people are more likely to open up and talk to us. So let me talk a little bit about what the heck a physician, like, what can a physician do for you, right? So I function in a variety of ways, as do some of my colleagues around the country, sometimes in person, or it could be remote, could be in real time, or I could be, instead of using my stethoscope, using my retrospectoscope, as I call it, and looking back at records, et cetera. I might be examining somebody, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I'm always looking at blood tests. There's all kinds of things I can tell from blood tests in terms of evidence of dehydration, malnutrition, toxicology screens, kidney function, a whole variety of things. So when I'm looking at records, I'm looking at blood tests. I'm looking at imaging studies, oftentimes brain imaging studies like CT scans or MRIs. Medications, prescription and over-the-counter, and medical records. I'm often asked to look at a variety of records. And when I'm looking at medical records, I often also want to see if there was a 911 call, the paramedic records, which are golden, police reports, which are golden, so that I kind of have a sense of what was going on real time. The other thing with physician consultation, is, I'm sorry, I'm having a mix up with my slides here, so give me just a minute. is what we need from you, so that sometimes what happens when I'm working with folks in law enforcement is they'll just like hand me stuff and say, was there a problem? And what I really appreciate when we're working together is the context of what happened. Like, what is your question that you want to ask? And how can you provide well-organized information so I'm clear and can do my best to answer your question? And I'm just going to give you 2 examples, really concrete, of what a nice referral looks like from my perspective. So here it might be. Somebody, a law enforcement might say to me, hey, Mr. Abernathy is an 87-year-old man, and he sort of, quote, gave his house to his caregiver. His daughter says he's really confused. He didn't know what he was doing. I have a copy of the police report with statements from him and his daughter and the caregiver, and I've got a ton of medical records I can give you. So here's my question for you, Laura or Dr. Mosqueda. Did he have the capacity to give his house to his caregiver in May 2022? That's a great question to ask me, because then I'll know what to focus in on, and I'll know what records to ask you for. And that's the beginning of a beautiful relationship where we can work together. And instead of you trying to figure out all these medical terms, et cetera, you can give it to somebody like me who can look through this sort of thing fairly quickly and zero in on what it is you're trying to figure out. So does that make sense? Okay. Thank you to whoever said yes. All right. I'm just going to give you one more example. Hopefully, is this about the 92-year-old up here? All right. So another example. There's a woman who's 92. 911 was called yesterday. She was found on the floor, multiple bruises. There was blood dripping from an ear. Her son said she fell, and she corroborated that she fell. But when the EMTs came out, they're like, this doesn't look like a usual fall. We're kind of worried about what's going on here. And she appeared to be afraid of her son. So she was admitted to the hospital. They took her to the emergency room. She was admitted to the hospital with a presumed fall. Emergency room physicians heard fall and went, yep, it's a fall. They didn't question it. And the police found out that this son has had 2 arrests for domestic violence in the past year with his wife. He's now the primary caregiver for his mom. And their question to me was, can you contact the hospital and help with getting documentation and tests needed to sort this out? Because we had a problem. We had an emergency room who accepted, they didn't have elder abuse on their differential diagnosis. They accepted this story of a fall. And that's why I was then called in, because the police were really worried. Paige can correct me later if I'm wrong, but it can be hard when you already have somebody who said, well, this was a fall, to now start prosecuting a case unless we can really go in and show that this was not just due to a fall. And I'll show you some of the bruising studies that help us with figuring these things out. So what is it I'm looking for then? In a history and observations, I'm looking for implausible explanations, vague explanations about how something happened, a delay in seeking care. Yes, this can happen, but why didn't somebody bring this person in a long time ago to get this taken care of? Unexplained injuries that you just notice. And what does it look like when the alleged victim and perpetrator are interacting? Are we seeing a fear reaction? Are we seeing a caregiver who seems to be belittling right in front of you or stopping them from speaking? It's really important to pay attention to those sorts of things. On physical exam, I'm looking at a variety of things. What is their general appearance? Do they look dirty? Do they look disheveled? Do they look emaciated? Are they making eye contact with me, or do they seem to be afraid? I'll do a general exam. One thing I always look at is feet, because especially when somebody's getting neglected, if family knows you're coming or that they're bringing you to the doctor's office, they might clean somebody up, but they never think you're going to look at the feet. And I was just recently on a house call, less than 2 months ago, where this woman had stopped walking. And when I took off her shoes and socks, her toenails were so overgrown, they curled under and were actually digging into the bottom of her feet. And that's why she had stopped walking. She was getting neglected. All right. So when I'm looking at injury assessment, things like bruises, pressure sores, etc., where are these injuries? Again, was there a delay in seeking care? And is the history consistent with the examination? So let me go through some examples of pressure sores, and then I'm going to go through some examples of bruising. So this is a cartoon. I'm going to show you a few actual photos in a minute, but kind of a graphic of pressure sores. I don't expect you to distinguish a stage 2 from a stage 3 pressure sore. You don't need to do that. I need to do that, and I have trouble doing that half of the time. But recognizing that some of these wounds are pressure sores, I think is helpful to do. And there's different stages of pressure sores. And we can go into that more detail later if you're interested. But for now, I just want to show you a few pictures of pressure sores. And just to tell you, a stage 1 is just when you have redness on the top. But what I want you to see in this graphic is that even though it just looks like a little bit of redness, the injury is much deeper than you would think it is if we actually go in and look. By the time you're at a stage 4 pressure sore, you're down to muscle, tendon, or bone. So let's just go through a couple examples. This is a pressure sore kind of below somebody's buttocks. And remember, one of the things I told you that I'm looking for in these injuries is location. This is a little bit of an unusual location. There's no way you would know that, but I know that. That's, again, a place where we need to work together, where I'm like, yeah, pressure sores happen on the buttocks, but this is a little bit of an unusual place on the buttocks. I'll really want to know what the history was that would explain this pressure sore to me. Let's just go to another example. This is a pressure sore on the heel, a very common place for a pressure sore. But again, if we want to talk about history and physical exam being consistent, if I have a caregiver going, well, she was just walking a couple days ago, I'm going to call that as a possible BS kind of a thing, because somebody who's up and ambulatory is very unlikely to get a pressure sore looking like this. So this is where I'm looking, is the history that we're getting consistent with the physical exam. In this last photo I'll show you is delay in seeking care, most likely, and could be, criminal neglect. I don't know. But this is somebody who came in filthy condition. They hadn't been caring for this. Nothing had been done. And that pressure sore did not just pop up overnight. So that's an example of delay in seeking care. Let me move on now and talk about bruises. And again, if you have any questions about pressure sores, we'll have time to go over that later, and or you can catch me later today as well. So bruises, again, very common for older adults to get bruises. Now, have any of you ever talked to a loved one who may have a bruise and you say, how did you get that bruise, Mom? And what do they often say to you? I don't know. I didn't even know I had a bruise there, right? Because so it is easier to bruise as we get older, and we do get put on medications that make bruisability easier, but there's certain things that can help us distinguish accidental bruising from inflicted bruising. And I'm going to show you a picture. This is anterior, and I'm going to come out and demonstrate what anterior is in a minute, and then the opposite of it is posterior. So anterior is like this. I'll spare you posterior so you don't have to look at my backside, but you get the idea. All right. So audience participation, what do you see as different when I show you accidental versus inflicted bruising anterior? What do you see on the inflicted side? Right. A lot more on the face, torso, etc. Here's posterior. What do you see different here? Same thing. Oh, sorry. I got to click both here. There we go. Again, head, neck, buttocks area, which we don't see with accidental bruising. So these are the kinds of things now that are going to get you on the alert. And I'm just going to show you a few photos, and I want you to yell out, and you can yell out at home too, if you think this is a concerning bruise on this person's shin. Does this worry you? Yeah, I mean, that's a common place for us to get bruised. I don't think I'm going to be asking a lot of questions about that one. What about this one? Yeah, I'm really worried about that one. It turns out this was not due to any sort of abuse. This woman told me what happened. It was a completely believable explanation. She's actually somebody I know, one of my patients. She knew I was doing a study on bruising, so she came in very proudly to show me this bruise. And what happened is she was a little unsteady on her feet. She was going over a tub to get into a bathtub. She said, I knew I was falling and I just had to slide down, and I ended up with all this bruising. And I said, I still want to ask you, has anybody hurt you? And she said, hell no. So I believed her. So a very weird bruise, very suspicious, benign cause. This one, this man was had a dementia, couldn't tell us what happened. His son brought him in and said that he fell. You can see he still has EKG leads in. This was an emergency. Are you worried? Yeah, we're worried. Massive bruising, torso, on different planes of the body. This is not bruising that you typically see with a fall. Highly suspicious for physical abuse. So that's the kind of thing that we can look at with bruising and pressure sores. Now, there are a variety of other forensic markers that occur. Dehydration, malnutrition, medications, all these sorts of things, all on Eagle. But we also have adapted with help from a lot of our partners in law enforcement, like Ron Gardner, like Detective Hill. We've modified a form that we hope will make it easy for law enforcement to also just kind of circle areas if you see any wounds, something you can print out quite easily, and just makes it much easier for you to identify where you might see bruises or wounds on a person. All right, I'm going to pivot for a minute and talk just about dementia. And how many of you know somebody, maybe have a loved one or know somebody who's had Alzheimer's disease or some other type of dementia? Yeah, it should be just about everybody, and it just about is. You know, it's a very difficult, tragic illness. People with dementia can be a real challenge to care for, and yet it doesn't make it okay to abuse. It doesn't make it okay to yell. It doesn't make it okay to belittle. So we're really working hard to help prevent abuse for people with dementia, but we know that about half of everybody who has a dementing illness will be abused or neglected at some point during the course of their illness. And while we're working hard toward prevention, we're not there yet. The person with dementia might not even know they're being abused or be able to report it, use a phone. They're often not believed, can't believe anything they say, they've got Alzheimer's, or people might not even realize they have a dementia. But what I see anecdotally in early Alzheimer's disease, where people kind of look good, are really good at cocktail parties because they can make small talk really well, is this is when they get taken advantage of, and we see a lot of financial abuse because they're very easily confused, can be very easily misled. In the middle stages, when people are having a lot more behavioral disturbance, agitation, resistance, they don't want help to getting dressed, this is when we're seeing a lot of physical abuse that goes on. And then in the later or more severe stages of dementia, when people need a lot of care, they may be bedbound, they might not be able to feed themselves, etc. This is when we see people who are suffering from severe neglect and sometimes are even neglected to death. So I'm just going to show you a video that talks about neglect. I'm sorry, I had forgotten to advance the slide. And it's not advancing now. There we go. Thank you, Ricky. So this is a police officer talking about a neglect case. It's about a minute or a minute and a half. Could we please roll that one?
Job that I could do.
Okay. He told me that medical care is very, very expensive, and he did not want to spend the money on taking care of his mother.
After interviewing Mr. Kirkland, we did secure a search warrant, and myself and the rest of the elder vulnerable adult abuse team responded to that home with our forensics group.
We had to climb over piles of newspaper and trash and just personal belongings. There was nowhere for her to sleep, nowhere for her to go.
She did not have a bed.
And we saw this white chair that she was sitting in.
But it had pattern stains in it that appeared to be bodily fluids. There were pattern marks on our victim's back above her open wound that actually matched that chair.
We did find a box of cornstarch.
Which we later determined is what he was packing the wound in her lower back with, and then cover it with newspaper to try to soak up the weeping that was coming from the wound.
And this is shockingly common. Neglect is shockingly common. And of course, by virtue of the fact that people are getting neglected, they're not coming to the doctor's office. But you're the ones who are going to see this. And we have to be very careful that we don't, if we can go to the next slide, we have to be very careful to not excuse what happened. Like, oh, it was too expensive, we couldn't do anything, or no matter what they're telling you, this person is suffering and maybe dying as a result in really horrible circumstances. So we're looking at factors with the victim, like hygiene and wounds, et cetera. And we're also looking at what this pattern is with the caregiver. So I wish I had a nickel for every time I heard the caregiver go, well, she didn't want to go to the doctor. Well, somehow we can get medical records and see before you took over care, she was going to the doctor regularly. So something changed related to you in all of this. So we have to be careful about the excuses that we hear. Some caregivers are just incompetent. They may have their own mental health problem or physical, intellectual disabilities, et cetera. We'll talk more about that. But still, the reality for the older adults is that they're getting neglected. And so we really have to figure out what's going on. So understanding what the caregiver's capabilities and limitations are, I think, is important, but we also have to be really careful about excuses. So it still needs a really adequate and vigorous evaluation, investigation, so that by the time you're going to a prosecutor, it might not get prosecuted, but you want to have all the information in order to make a really informed decision about what's going on. And we need to know what's going on with the caregiver so we can help both parties. So my final slide is, you heard this person, officer, talk about the team that he went with. We have to work in teams because this is too complicated for any one of us to figure out on our own. We all have different areas of expertise, and we're all serving that older adult who's in the middle of all of this. What I'd like to do now, and we're going to be talking about multidisciplinary teams during the rest of this conference, but what I'd like to do now is turn the podium over for the next 15 minutes to Julie Shane, who's going to talk to you about EAGLE, the Elder Abuse Guide for Law Enforcement. And after that, we're going to do some case-based stuff to get everybody going and participating in our conversation with Detective Hill. So I'll turn it over to Julie. It was costume change for Julie. All right. Are you going to pop up here?
I think. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Okay. I think I'm okay. Okay, thank you. I feel like I'm at the Super Bowl that I won to go to show this audience all about the Elder Abuse Guide for Law Enforcement. And I first wanted to thank Andy, Mao, and Shelley and the team from EGI, JI to give us this opportunity. And also Dr. Laura Mosqueda, because it is the confidence that she instills that has kind of brought EAGLE to light for all of us. So I'm just thrilled. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to, I have the team with me. So I'm Julie Shane, I'm director of the EAGLE program. And then I have Alexis Calleros and Ricky Esquivel in the back. And they're going to help me move from slides to the internet, because the best way to experience EAGLE is to do it live. So we want to take you in and just tell you a little bit about how Eagle got started. And I think they're going to move to the next slide. There we go. It's for everything that Dr. Mosqueda set the stage on. It's happening in our communities. We expect so much of law enforcement, as Director Clements was saying, and we want something that will help to support our law enforcement in this very important issue. And we got this quote from a very important member of our team because, you know, we put together a lot of things for Eagle. We did a lot of trial and error, but the real people to advise us was law enforcement themselves. And Ron Gardner, Deputy Gardner, you hear, there he is, and he came to us. He's using Eagle regularly and said, I've got some suggestions for you. So I want you all, as we go through this today, to take notes, let us know how we can improve and do better all the time. But Ron has called this Eagle is as important as your badge in your arsenal of tools. So I hope you all feel the same about that when we finish here. So the next slide, you're going to think, oh, what? Look at, she's telling me I can pull out my phone. Pull out your phone. Don't go on Instagram. We want you to stay here with Eagle. And please use the QR code. Eagle is a web module. It's free. It's not an app. So when we're making changes in the office on Eagle, it's all seamless behind the scenes. So you can use your laptop also if you're doing that. And you can put in the eagle.usc.edu in your search engine, and you will also be brought to the Eagle site. How many of you have been on Eagle before? Woo! Nice, very good. Well, not only will you experience Eagle as you know it, we also have some new things to share with you today that we hopefully will make this just as interesting for you that have experienced it. Okay, I think then we can go, gonna go live? Okay, we're gonna go live, fingers crossed, we access and we're on. Okay, oh, there's a picture of Sherry Hill there. That's good. That's it. Technical. Okay. This is the Eagle site when you go on your laptop. And what I'd like to do is just give you a quick overview of this landing page. And then we're going to go into the top sites. And I'm going to check my time here just to make sure of where I am. Okay, good. All right. So we have things about Eagle if you want to learn about the contacting Eagle, which will be Ricky, Alexis, or myself when you contact us. That's why I felt it's very important for them to be here today. And Eagle training resources, which we'll talk more about as we go along. That red ribbon across the top or on your phone, sometimes it's the little menu bars that also has them. We're going to have an elder abuse overview for you. Our state-specific laws are very popular, and then law enforcement resources. And then some of the tools that have been most popular in the first responder checklist, the evidence collection checklist, and community resources. And then in this gold bar, this is the work of the National White Collar Crime Center. Jim Foley, where are you, Jim? You here? Way over there. NW3C has been the most incredible partner with Eagle. You can go on and go into the NW3 site and take a free class for about 1.5 credits that in 36 states is IATLIS certified. So those of you in IATLIS states, you're all set. For those of you in post states, we're working on it. California has just approved, yay. Yes, that was big move. And what we have found is that when you take the course and then you show your training department, they're approving it. We haven't had anybody who has not approved it. So please check out the NW3C Eagle training. We have a section on roll call videos. You've seen little snippets of those. These were done by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Outstanding job. We just feel so honored to have them on the site. And then I'll also be introducing you to our new Eagle tactical training, because so many of you asked us, I'd like something to take back to the force, or I want to do something on my own, or I want to take something out to the community. So we put all that together because you don't have the time, and we want to have it there and accessible for you. So, oh, and then our Eagle newsletter, but we have lots of ways you can find that. So Alexis, let's go into the elder abuse overview really quick, just to kind of give you a sense. Dr. Mosqueda set the stage. These are complex, messy cases, so much going on. You can't be an expert in all these, but we set it up in a little quick hit that maybe you could get some things from. Let's do physical abuse, Alexis, because we're going to get a lot of financial abuse throughout the conference. We set this up in a 3x5 card type of layout, so you can look about physical abuse, that definition. You can then some signs, and these will then automatically lead you to Dr. Mosqueda's bruising chart, other photos, things about pressure sores. So it's all linked in, so you can go from one to another. Then questions you might want to ask, because it is all about asking the question, right? And it's all about waiting for the answer and listening. And then it will have some actions that you might want to take. You might want to then go to our first responders checklist that we'll be moving to next, or you might want to look at some photo tips on how to photograph a bruise. So these are things that are available to you. And we have each type of elder abuse laid out for you in this specific format. Okay. So I think, Alexis, yeah, we'll just keep moving along and go to the state-specific laws. All right, so this is where we need your help a lot, because this is where you can find out what's in your state-specific laws. We're going to choose DC since we're here, and you would find your state, click on that, and then we have a layout of what is happening right now in elder abuse, charges, laws. It will take you to the website, and it's right there for you. Now, every state's different. Some have a lot here, some don't have quite so much. But what I can tell you is that it's improving greatly and that we're seeing such wonderful changes. Then we have some issues about some verbiage about the state mandated reporting in District of Columbia, so that you know how to get this information, how to get to it. So I urge you to go to your state, look at it and say, wait a minute, Julie, we just had a major change in our laws. You need to update this. Because we're a strong but mighty little team at Eagle, and we really love your help when you point out something to us, and we'll get that changed just as soon as possible. And we just did a big sweep and did about 24 of the states, but it's continual, and that's a good thing. We like seeing the changes, but we just need your help in doing that. So that's where you'd find the state-specific laws. And then we just have lots of law enforcement resources for you that you can. Eagle jumps back into place. As you can see, it runs along the right-hand side also. Dr. Mosqueda's new injury documentation tool that she showed you is right here. You can grab that. We have some things for you about interviewing older adults, some of the photos depicting abuse, photography tips, the Senior Abuse Financial Tracking and Accounting Tool, SAFTA. Some of you might want to use for your forensic investigations. Of course, are working with others to build a case, community resources. Oh, and the bruising chart that Dr. Mosqueda showed you is right up there too. I'm sorry, I kind of skipped that. So that's very important for you if you just want to access that quickly. Okay. There it is. So you can just get right to that and have that at your fingertips when you need it. Okay. Good on that? All right. We'll just keep moving here. Now, state-specific laws is probably our most popular go-to on the site, but the first responders checklist is next. Many of you helped us with this first responders checklist, and Deputy Gardner just helped us with this last revision of it. This is meant for you. We don't keep any data that we can't see what you put in. We don't get any of this. This is just for you. You can do it online and then email it to yourself. You'll see at the bottom of when we get down there, or you can print out if you're like me and you like a hard copy piece of paper, you can print it out. We had no idea. Some of you have printers in your cars. And so if that's better for you, we want you to use that. Gives you basic information. Ron told us it's very important not to make law enforcement duplicate reporting. So let's try to put it together as much as we can. And we heard that and changed that up a bit. And then just some observational things. Your safety first, of course, and then that of the older adult. And who else was there, and were you able to talk to them alone? Then we want you to really look at that older adult. Don't take the word for the caregiver. Oh, they're fine, but they're sleeping in the back room, so nothing's going on. It's just my nosy neighbors. No, we want you to look at that older adult. We want you to see, oh, they're having trouble hearing. Do they have hearing aids? They're wearing glasses. Do they seem confused? And then just some of the other things that you're very used to asking about, languages and documenting those. issues. And then any types of medications they might be taking, because that can wreak a lot of havoc, or people, use medications as a chemical restraint to keep somebody sedated. Just things about hygiene and appearance. These are all drop-down menus that you can utilize. And for if you're out on a financial abuse case, you'll, maybe not use some of this, but it's good. It's good to get the whole lay of the land and see what's happening. And then Alexis will go to the physical, and this box, enter victims, there we go. Enter victim self-report description. The most important thing. What are they able to tell you? What do they say? What impressions do you get from their responses? So important. And I see, the sexual abuse. We have so far to go in this area. You are more adept at sexual abuse and when a rape is reported or other type of abuse. But this is something that we have no idea how much of is going on. And we have a lot of work to do to get better about this. So those are some of the things, as you see when you're filling it out online. You can then email it to yourself, or you can create the PDF and save and continue later. So we hope if you haven't used it, you find it useful. If you do use it and you have a question or a concern, let us know. We want to keep this going and improving. Then we have our evidence collection checklist. A lot of adult protective services workers like this, a lot of ombudsmen, and it's just a shorter form, but makes you kind of observational going through it, and just kind of the quick hit of some things that might be really important to a prosecutor to really lay out their case. So that one's available to you too, that you can print out. And I think we'll just go right on into the next section of community resources. We get to work with the wonderful people at Elder Care Locator. So all you have to do here is put in your zip code. We're using DCs again. And then you will get the resources that are in the area. So usually starts with Adult Protective Services. Not always called Adult Protective Services in your state, child and adult, or there's a mix of them, but usually it's some form of Adult Protective Services. Their website, here's information you can leave a family member that you can have for them. So it's usually laid out the same. It will be mainly Adult Protective Services, then things like the Office on Aging or the Area Agency on Aging, whatever you call it in your state. And information, a lot of people want us to put their information on the Eagle site. We only really do those things that are vetted and are part of more of the government-based programs, just to keep it verified. And again, if somebody's address changed, somebody's phone number changed, whatever, and we're behind that, let us know, and we let Elder Care Locator know, and they are very quick to change it for us. So they appreciate it too, because it keeps them current. So that would be for community resources. Then we have the roll call training videos. You've seen little snippets of them. Can't thank IACP enough for putting these together. I would suggest they're all fascinating cases. They all give a lot of really great information, but definitely understanding elder abuse and who's that up there? Interviewing older adults is also very good, just kind of beginning stages. All of them are about 7 to 10 minutes. And if you can use them in your precincts, we would really appreciate it. You never have to ask us, use them, have them. We just are very happy to support that. And then after the roll call videos, we just go into our training resources. Lots of training resources for you. We just finished the Eagle tactical training. DOJ was so great about encouraging us to put together something that is more customizable for you. Things that you might want to use, whether for community presentations, such as elder abuse in your community, a PowerPoint presentation, some other videos and things that are available here. And let's see. Yeah, there we go. And then to the trainer's guide, not really a guide, it's just some tips. If you're out there in the community and you have to present and utilize Eagle, it's pretty short form. You can just print it out easily and take it with you. And then Alexis recorded a really nice quick hit presentation of what I'm just telling you now. This is Eagle, this is how you navigate it and get through. So that's available for you too. So that's in the tactical training. Alexis, Ricky, what am I forgetting? Okay. No, you're good? Really? Okay, very good. Again, what can I say, but what a pleasure it is to work on this program, to get to know all of you, to try to help in some way. But we're always learning and growing, so please let us know. And now I think we want to turn it back over to Dr. Mosqueda and Detective Sherhill to actually see things in action. Come on up. I'll stop. Okay, thank you.
As a physician, I give you permission to go to the bathroom. Sir.
Can you guys hear this?
One.
It's working. Okay.
So we won't use these then? Fine.
We're standing down here.
That works for you.
Where are you guys going?
Okay.
Okay, that's good.
So use your mic.
Have a seat, guys. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay. I just need to get the clicker. So we're sort of demonstrating an MDT for you here. It's been a lot of teamwork with tech support and everything else, and flexibility to make things work. And so we're just role modeling for you. That's all. All right. Well, we really wanted to give a big shout out to the Anaheim Police Department in Orange County, California. And I used to work in Orange County at University of California, Irvine, where I had the great pleasure of meeting Detective Hill. And so she and I have worked together for a number of years, and so we'll be talking about a few cases. And then we jumped on the opportunity with Paige Ulrey being here to also drag her into some of our case presentations. And again, I think this will be a lot more interesting if you all join in. Before we start the first case, though, I just want to ask, are there any questions or comments from what Julie and I just presented that would help before we start talking about the cases? That's my first question. Let me just, and I apologize, I didn't ask earlier, are we able to take questions from the chat or no? Okay, so this will just be from the live audience. Well, the rest of you are alive too. You're just not here. So from the people in front of me, any questions or comments? Hi, and so I'll just say we do have at least one microphone, but if you're going to ask a question, we're going to give you a mic so that the people at home can also.
It's more of a comment. Hi, I'm Stacy Phillips. I'm with the Office for Victims of Crime. And I think for me, more newer to learning about elder justice itself, as a previous child abuse investigator, what stood out to me was just the similarities of what you're looking for in terms of physical abuse. It was just a click right there on those sensitive parts of the body. It's identical.
Yes, there's so many similarities. And I actually, when I started working in this field, spent a lot of time with colleagues in child abuse to learn what they were looking at, how they were looking at things. So, and I think we've got a lot to learn from each other across fields of many similarities and then a few key differences too. Yeah, absolutely. Any other comments or before we get into the cases? Okay. And for those on that half of the room, if you do have questions or comments, you're welcome to use the microphone back there. And then we have handheld mics that we can hand you so that everybody can hear you. All right. Well, I'm just here to click slides for Detective Hill.
Okay, so first of all, I know you guys that sit in the back row usually wear sunglasses in California at least. So I'm watching you guys back there. We'll make sure you stay awake, okay? I'm Detective Sherry Hill. I've been a cop for a little over 25 years. I worked about 14 years in elder abuse, and the rest of that time a field training officer as well as a patrol officer. So when I started out doing elder abuse back in the day, I have to tell you guys that I raised my hand and I said, I'll work elder abuse cases, right? I had absolutely no clue back in 2006 what I was doing. I didn't know what a pressure sore was. I can remember talking with Dr. Mosqueda once and I said, you know, what's that hole on the ass back there? And she's like, we don't call it that. We call it a sacrum. And I was like, okay. So I learned a lot. It took me a lot. And it took me a lot of individual research. So I was looking at journal. I would call the doctors. I would call the researchers at UCI and say, you know, this old person has a really weird bruise and I have no clue what I'm looking at. And they said, well, what do you know? We did a study sponsored by the DOJ, thank you very much, on accidental and non-accidental bruising. And so I had to go back and get this study and try and figure out what all those big words meant. And mind you, before that, I was a public school teacher. So what does that say? But I had to figure out what everything meant. And I am going to make a plug for Eagle, you guys. This has been a long, really hard battle in elder abuse cases. And I know I was talking to a gentleman right there earlier that works elder abuse cases, right? This is a tough field. We are still growing. People don't want to look when older people die because it is ugly and it's us, right? It could happen to any of us. Straight up, it happened to me when I was hospitalized. State of California, I was considered a dependent adult when I was put into the hospital for 24 hours and abused, right? And I'd already been a detective. So when I say we cannot do this alone and we need the tool of Eagle, I highly recommend those of you that are here from Post and those of you that are here from other agencies, download Eagle. It is going to save you 100% of time. You're not going to be going, what the heck does this bruise mean? What is a bed sore? I don't need to know the stages of a bed sore because guess what? I do work with MDTs and forensic centers, and I think you probably all have them in your states. So great resources. So say thank you for listening, but we're going to talk about now a few cases, and some of these are actually from when I first started out and was kind of clueless about what I was doing and trying to drag my knuckles along and figure things out, right? So if we'll go to the next one. Okay. So this was my mom didn't like, you guys probably have all seen something similar to this. This is my mom didn't like me touching her because I gave all my cases quotes from my suspect. And this was actually a quote from my suspect. Basically, patrol responds to the death of an 84-year-old female. She dies alone in her home. Her sole caretaker is her 54-year-old son. There's nobody else in the home, excessive hoarding. The house, it smelled, it stank, it was disgusting. You couldn't get through the front door. When patrol officers got there, they go in and they noticed that there, even though it stank on the outside and there were the fly strips hanging and they were crawling over stuff, right? They noticed that there was a pathway to the living room, which is where mom was. And mom was in these immaculate conditions in the living room. She had fresh sheets. She had fresh blue pads or chucks, they're called. Everything was fresh and she looked beautiful. She had some kind of oil rubbed all over her body. Her hair was done up really nicely. So patrol officers didn't have the benefit of the bruising study that we have now, right? Or they didn't have the benefit of Eagle and going in and seeing that the type of bed sore this woman had wasn't normal. They called the coroner's office and the coroner came out and decided, you know, they do their thing. In the state of California, we can't touch the bodies, but they flip the body and they're like, oh, hey, there's a big honking sore back there. But they take the body. They take the body. But for some reason, those patrol officers, God bless them, were highly suspicious. And they called myself and a homicide detective out. And we get out there and we have no body, right? Well, think about this. When we have elder abuse cases in law enforcement, a lot of them lead to death, right? So we don't have the victim to talk to. So we did have a scene though. And so what are we going to do? We're going to document and contain that scene. So we get out there and we have the suspect in hand. We find out what he actually did was he stayed with his mom for 8 hours and he rubbed oil all over her body. We went through the trash and found evidence that also what he did was he went to Walmart and he got bed sheets and he got those blue chucks and he also got stuffed animals and he bought cameras. Well, now we're going like, why are you buying stuffed animals and you're buying cameras, right? We found out later on that he had a sexual fetish. It's called plushophilia, by the way. However, we also found out through forensics that there was some unusual bruising on the mom, which kind of goes in with the plushophilia. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This bruising. So my forensic specialist was like, hey, Cher, I know you really like to look at this stuff because you're a gorgoon. Let me show you the bruise that she had before coroner takes her out, right? And what I notice is she's got this weird bruise, like this is the decedent, right? But she's got this bruise right here, which I know in the bruising study, it's larger than 2 inches. It's in a lateral area on her arm. She's got one on her breast. And I'm like, ew, that's not normal. That isn't normal. That's not a normal bruise. Suspect could not explain that bruise, but what he could explain was the bruise that she got on her leg. So I was like, oh, highly suspicious. He cleans the room. His chair is next to her. I suspect sexual abuse. I don't have the body. So I decide based on my suspicions and some statements that he made, my mom doesn't like me touching her. Why are you going to say that, right? I present this case to the Elder Abuse Forensic Center in Orange County and the Elder Death Review Team, of which Dr. Mosqueda was sitting on the Elder Death Review Team. And what I was saying to you guys, I didn't have a lot, right? But you need to use your resources. How many of you guys in here have MDTs or Elder Death Review Teams? We need more then. We need you guys to start them. So we presented this case. And actually what ended up, she had died, he had put a grape down her throat. She didn't have teeth, but she ate a grape and she actually, what do you call that? Like choked to death. Yeah, on a grape. She was not raped. We couldn't prove anything in this case because he had a mental health element to him, which makes these cases very tough. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say we can't prosecute because there's a mental health issue, because most people have mental health issues.
Oh,
And I would say that leave that to the criminal justice system. So you, detective, bring
Put the case
me your
together.
case, put the case together. We will charge this person and then let the court process determine whether or not they're able to stand trial and what the appropriate sentence would be for them. So I wouldn't want that to be a reason not to investigate.
So that's perfect, right, guys? Because some of us will go like, oh, he's crazy. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to 5150 him or 5149 and a half or whatever. But so it's great to hear from a prosecutor. So I would say to cover you too is always present it. And this was not rehearsed, by the way. Okay, so what I want to show you guys, okay, this is it right here. This is what she looked like when I walked in. I mean, I literally smelled everything outside the door from about 8 feet, right? But that's what she looked like. I mean, you could see how clean it is, right? He had spent 8 hours in there with her, doing things with her. So I was suspicious, and I used to work the West End of Anaheim, and I love to do dope tosses, and I love to toss beds. So I was like, hey, let's toss the mattress because something doesn't smell right to me. So use your spidey sense of being cops, guys. I tossed the bed. And guess what I found underneath that immaculate bed that the deputy coroner didn't look at? She had seeped through to the bottom of actually to the floor. So that was a bed sore. She went through to the bottom of the floor. I asked him, well, did you know she had a bed sore on her? And his response was, oh, no, that must have been from when my dad lived here. So I call that an LLPOF, liar, liar, pants on fire, right? Okay.
I hate it when you use all that technical. So I'll just say that, what the possibility that I can contribute, and I would love to find some more partners with coroners where I think those of us who are used to seeing living people can work with those who are working with people who've passed, can work together to understand what to accept as normal, common, age-related, possible kinds of abuse, because we do overly, as we talked about, overly accept things. And then also the documentation then I think that can help for a prosecutor
Yeah, so in any of these cases, I would ask the detective to get the financial records and see if there was a financial motive to keep the victim at home rather than getting her proper care. This case actually looks appealing to me from a prosecutorial standpoint because what we usually have to show in a neglect case is that the perpetrator knew of and disregarded the risk that the victim was in. And by virtue of the fact that he was cleaning the sheets, cleaning her body, we could show that he had that knowledge. If he was living in the same filth she was in, and she was totally not cared for, then maybe the defense could say, look, he had no idea. He's as miserable as she is. He's self-neglecting as well. But in a case like this, where he appears to have a different standard of living and he's cleaning her up, that goes to his knowledge, which makes the case more viable. And then again, getting those financial records, getting her records from her primary care provider to see if she was someone who sought out medical care in the past when she had control over her life. Those are the things that I'd really want to see in a case like this.
And also there was an APS prior where there was a daughter that she was a dependent adult that he actually kind of forced out of the home for forcing her to take medications. So.
And I'll just mention then that there are some tools from Eagle that could be useful. Yeah.
Yeah. Take pictures, guys. Tell your patrol cops, take pictures. And if they can, take the Band-Aids off. We love it when Band-Aids are not on, right? We want to see these. And Eagle will tell you how to go ahead and do that. Then you got the collection checklist as well.
So, oh, sorry. Well, so just before we move on to the next case, are there any thoughts, questions, reactions to this first case? Yes, and I'll maybe ask you, well, we have a mic for you there, just so that people on the web can hear.
You mentioned before about getting medical records. Obviously, if they have pill bottles, you can get doctor's name off of them. Is there a way to get the doctor's name from Medicare or Medicaid?
So you can look at doctor's name, or do you want to? You can look at doctor's names on pill bottles, but just recognize that while it often is the treating physician, sometimes we're covering for each other and it's not, but it at least gives you a phone number to trace back pretty easily. And then I'll let you comment on tracing back via Medicaid, Medicare. My understanding is that through law enforcement, you are able to do that.
I have had cases where detectives were able to get that information. It's a great question, but usually it is Medicare or Medicaid that's paying for those doctor's visits. So I don't know the exact answer about how you do it, but I know you can obtain that.
The other thing that I would mention is if you go into Eagle, there's a great resource in there that talks about HIPAA and the exceptions to HIPAA. If a suspect is the perpetrator, HIPAA doesn't apply if you go back into that federal code. So go into Eagle and you'll be able to print that up. And what I typically do is once I do get the name of the doctor from the prescription bottle, which by the way, she had tons of them in another room that she couldn't access. She couldn't walk anyway. So, but I was able to get that and then take the HIPAA exception to the medical records doctor's office.
And I will say that physicians and healthcare systems often use HIPAA as an excuse to not provide information. And it can be very hard to break through that barrier. It's actually not an adequate excuse. They're supposed to share that information. So you can push hard, but sometimes it's really hard to do. The other thing that's weird, this just happened to me last week, Adult Protective Services was trying to get information. And I call and I say, this is Dr. Mosqueda. I need to talk to a physician, and I'm able to get through. So sometimes we use each other to help get through to another professional because APS had been trying and couldn't, and I was able to do it, fairly quickly. So whatever we can do to help each other move more efficiently and more effectively, we do in our multidisciplinary teams.
And usually APS, in my experience, is able to get the records pretty easily. And so they can share those with law enforcement without any legal issues. But if they can't get them, we usually just write a search warrant, and we've never had any resistance once we walk in there with a warrant.
Oh, the cereal box fell on my arm case. This was a 74-year-old female. I believed, and again, I don't have MD behind my name, but I believe that she had dementia, right? The case came in that she got into an argument with her 23-year-old grandson. So there was about 6 people that lived in the home, all from the same family. They get into an argument. During that argument, they're fighting over a remote because she wants to watch wrestling and he wants to watch football. And so she gets injured and she runs outside and she goes to a neighbor, wherewithal to do that. And she said, call 911, I've been hurt. My grandson hurt me. And so she gets bruising on her face, and she also gets a laceration on her wrist and bruising and swelling. And so this is great, right? The cops do a great thing. The only thing is they didn't take the Band-Aid off, but that's all right. So they do a great thing. And they take a suspect statement and they actually end up arresting this guy for elder abuse. And the grandson goes to jail. However, the next day, the entire family brings grandma back to the front counter of the police department, and I get a phone call. I'm at my desk drinking my coffee, and they call and say, hey, this lady's here. It never happened. A cereal box fell on her wrist and injured her. So you can go ahead and I think you need to release this guy because she's saying now that she lied. And I'm like, well, no, that doesn't work that way. So I said, get the dad or get the son's name, and I'll give him a call back. So what do we use in law enforcement? We use a ruse, right? So I call back, hey, buddy, this is great. You know, I'm so glad you're calling. I really want to make sure that that cereal box fell on her arm. So can we set up a time? Does she have dementia? Well, yeah, she kind of forgets things. Well, what's a good time to talk to her? And you'll see that's another thing. Figure out when's a good time to talk to them, right? So I said, let's go ahead and bring her in then. Let's find out about the cereal box falling on her wrist, causing this injury, so we could help your son out. And then I go immediately to the Elder Abuse Forensic Center and I present my case to Dr. Mosqueda and Adult Protective Services and prosecutors. And Dr. Mosqueda agrees to come out in a very nice environment and do a cognitive and physical review for me.
Yeah, so I went to a Family Justice Center and did an interview and found out that she did indeed have a dementia, but she was also able to tell us a story and of what happened that I thought was very believable. So we tend to assume that people with memory loss, you can't believe anything they say. And while there can be cases of what's called confabulation, people making things up, etc., we also know that different kinds of memories take different pathways through our brain. And sometimes memories that are associated with a strong emotion go through a different part of the brain and actually are very reliable. And that was the case here. They had been coaching her on this whole cereal box thing. That's what she couldn't remember. Because they were trying to teach her some new information, but she could remember the real event of her grandson hitting her with a remote control and causing that injury, which we were able to document as a very believable statement on her part. Should I show the photos?
And so this case was prosecuted. He did go to jail. And this is like the before and after. Do use your measuring tool, right? A lot of us like to use a pen. Just take a picture of the pen with it. But this is like if you got bruises and the lacerations.
Use your mic.
Oh, would you look at that and say that's a normal bruise, like from being old, or would you look at that and go, "Ooh, something must have happened to her"? You see the swelling on it.
Right. It's so when I look at this, I mean, that would have to be one hell of a cereal box. And just an unusual location. We didn't have a history consistent with the exam. So she had extensive bruising in an unusual spot. Very consistent with a grandson hitting her with a remote control.
The other thing I'd be worried about as a prosecutor in a case like this is just what's going to happen with her living in that home in the future if she has to be, a witness in the trial. So did you guys deal with that?
Yeah, so at the Family Justice Center, we actually have the ability to put her. The problem is a lot of our elders we have to remove from their home. and it's their home, right? It's where they're safe and comfortable. So we do have options for that. In this case, it was a little bit difficult. We were able to get the restraining order against the grandson, but no, we were not able to get her out of that home specifically because we had nowhere to put her she felt safe. She felt safest at home with that family.
And sadly, we often see the family rallying around the suspect rather than around the victim in cases like this.
Yeah, I'll go to the next case, but just any questions, comments, observations on this one?
Anybody have similarities where they've dealt with people that have dementia and have something happen to them where it's severe abuse and you know they're telling the truth, even though they've been diagnosed with dementia? I see nodding heads. Good, good.
And in this particular case, some of the Eagle tools. What's that?
Questions?
Oh, yes.
Hi. Going back to the elder who reports an injury, but they have some onset of dementia. I have a case like that right now. I'm a prosecutor in Baltimore City. And my question is, I'm often wondering from a prosecutorial standpoint, how much detail is going to be required, because my victim will get tripped up no matter how we go about it. He's very clear. 4 months, 5 months later, he's still very clear on the incident. But when you get into surrounding background information, he sometimes reports that his daughter, who is actually deceased, was present, or he's doing fill-ins a little bit. But he's solidly reporting the same thing from 6 months ago, and we have pictures of the injuries. So I'm wondering how I shore up my victim's statements. I had a interview done on tape and audio to document it early. But as far as for trial purposes, any suggestions on what other things we can do to support what he reported initially and getting it before a jury?
Great question. I think one of the things I would do in a case like that is probably have take a deposition of him, because the interview, we probably can't use at trial because you're entitled to cross-examine the witnesses against you. So we can't usually use an interview describing the incident itself at trial. But a deposition is a situation where the defense attorney can be present, the defendant can be present, and we basically preserve their testimony so that if their dementia progresses, which it will, or if they die prior to trial, which they may, we can still go forward. The other thing I would do is try to get an expert like Laura there to testify about the fact that, as she was just talking about, people with dementia tend to have a pretty good ability to remember traumatic events, even if they forget other things that are more trivial, and to explain the injury causation. Because usually you're going to get some BS defense like the cereal box. And when you have that and you have your expert explaining that a cereal box could not have caused an injury like that, it's going to be pretty compelling to a jury. And I just have found in putting people with dementia on the stand, provided they're competent to testify, which is a pretty low bar, it's very effective. Jurors get it because most of them, like most of us, have family members or someone else they are close to who has dementia. So they're experienced with it and they're sympathetic and they really get that vulnerability, which ends up helping our case.
Do you find that most juries will sort of accept, because it does look kind of screwy when they're saying that a dead person was there, right? So do you find that most juries are willing to sort of accept an explanation from an expert on this is why all of this other stuff, yes, is not true, but why we believe this?
I think so. I mean, I think explaining that things that aren't traumatic drift easily from the mind if you have dementia, but things that are traumatic tend to cement themselves in the mind. And I think people get that, especially if there's no other likely causation of the injury, either as far as other perpetrators or other things in the home that could have caused that injury.
So, yeah. And I'll just say that, having occasionally testified, I just sort of view myself as a teacher for the jury, which I just pretend I'm in a classroom and trying to explain things in plain language to the extent possible and anticipate what people might be thinking and address that to the best of our ability. And the other really important piece is just how well, when I have worked, for example, with Paige, how well she prepares me, which is really key when you're doing expert testimony.
I tend to prepare the questions with the help of the expert. So we have the whole story there in front of her, and she can sort of go through them and help me ask her the questions that she needs me to ask her so she can explain properly to the jury what happened.
All right, I think we have just a few minutes left, so we'll just do one more.
Yeah,
Yes.
skip through and just go to Mr. Lopez. I think that'll add the fiduciary aspect to it. Okay, I know y'all saw that. Sorry.
Was that this?
No, let's go to, yes, we went on a cruise a week ago. Thank you. Okay, my very first elder abuse case. I had no idea what I was doing, right? But I walked in and knowing that elderly people shouldn't look like what you just saw, right? So do you mind going to the pictures real fast? So I knew that this wasn't normal for me, at least, aging, right? So I went in very highly suspicious. And what I ended up doing was getting all the medical records, and there was 900 pages of them. I also interviewed the nutritionist at the hospital because I wanted to see if he was malnourished, and indeed he was, right? So, and he weighed actually, he was 90 pounds and he was 6 foot tall, 93 years old. And this is one that we turned him over. This was what was behind him. And if you don't mind, Dr. Mosqueda, if we go back to, so we went on a cruise. So granddaughter was his caretaker, right? She was court appointed conservator. So for all of you guys that do fiduciary, right? Court appointed meant she was getting money to provide care for him. There was also a court appointed guardian, really important, that would oversee her care of Mr. Lopez. He's a 93-year-old male widower. He had assets. He had a house and he had $300,000. By the time that he had passed, which was within a few days of those pictures, he had nothing. He had nothing. But she had a brand new house. She had braces like me, and she went on a cruise. So, but what she told me when I interviewed her about the status of Mr. Lopez, she said, well, he's fine. He was walking just a week ago. We went on a cruise. We were gone for 10 days. And I'm thinking, this guy was not on a cruise a week prior. We get called by the hospital social worker, and I look at this and I'm like, what do I do with all this? So those of you that don't have MDTs, this is why they are so important, right? I take all my information to the Elder Abuse Forensic Center. It's as simple as that. And I said, can you please look at these medical records? I think this man was neglected to death. I know that his finances were stolen, but unfortunately in this particular case, the court sanctioned it and said, you know, we know he took all that money, or she took all the money, but we're gonna just make her pay it back. So she got no criminal charges on her. And as a side note, when the court appointed guardian went in to check on her care of him, he said he looked great. He didn't roll him over to see that he had a bed sore. When they went to the doctor's office, the doctor wrote in the medical records that Mr. Lopez was receiving exquisite, and I quote that, care.
So I'm going to just make one comment on that, because this is like a real problem among physicians. Somebody comes in, they've got a blanket over them. They look like they're all nice and snuggy in their wheelchair, and all you see is their head, and you haven't, like, I'm begging physicians, really working hard with other healthcare providers to look at these sorts of things and not put, because I would assume it makes it harder to prosecute when you have a physician who just wrote that they had exquisite care.
Yes, and I would also say the same thing for patrol with dead bodies in the home. We've had cases where the elder looks really good, the house is immaculate, victim is an older person who is dead, suspect is there, the concerned caregiver, and everything looks fine. And then they call the funeral home, the body's released, they call the funeral home, and in the funeral home, they turn the body over and see a massive pressure sore on the backside. That's also a case where we lose all the evidence because everyone assumed everything was appropriate. So really, for all of us, patrol, detectives, medical people, looking at the entire body is crucial.
Sorry to interrupt you. Was there anything else on this one? No, okay. So just so we end on time, so you all get your break, I'm just going to skip ahead again, mention that I think Eagle can be very helpful with these things. Um, and I think all of us just want to give a great big thank you to the work you do and figure out how, people like me can work better with you and be more helpful so that we're helping each other on really behalf of the public that we're all serving, in order to really minimize the suffering and the death that's going on right now. I know you have a huge variety of things that you have to be knowledgeable about. What we're hoping for is that if we just raise your awareness about these issues and you then have really practical tools to go back to and people that you can call, that it might make your important work just a little bit easier. So thank you for your attention.